Hi, it's Tim Hagan from Progress Coaching, and welcome to Employee Engagement Coaching. Now, this is going to be an overview, and I would share with you even a master class. I think leaders, we have it tough today. I think you as a leader have it tough. If you happen to be in training or HR, you have it really tough because your leaders have it tough. What do I mean by that? In the last 4 or 5 years, we have more employees now working from home and asking, can I work from home 3 days a week instead of one? That changes the conversation. We didn't even have those conversations really before the pandemic, at least most of us. So when we think about a historical perspective of what we inherit as leaders, what we inherit are former bosses, expectations, misunderstood expectations. Let me give you an example. When we give someone feedback, especially the things they don't want to hear, has anyone ever hugged and kissed you and said, thanks, I needed that? Or do you get the folding of the arms and the rolling of the eyes and all that stuff? So I always love to share this. For 30 some years, I've coached boys volleyball on and off, and I still have players. And the night before recording this, I actually met with a former player, and he said, I would always have your back, coach. You were so good to me in high school. I'm getting better at feedback. I would make all my guys get feedback from their teammates and just say thank you. And one kid, the kid that I met with last night, said, what if I hear something I don't like? I go, oh, I know you. You will. But then you have to ask yourself, do people want to come back and give you feedback again based on your reaction? Are you pushing away feedback? Or are you inviting feedback? If you're pushing feedback away and it gets silent, do not complain about what you don't hear. And so kids would learn this, and now they're adults. Here's the funny thing. When was the last person who came to you and said, oh, I took a year-long course in how to seek and accept feedback responsibly and transparently and professionally? Probably never happened, right? So what we inherit in the workplace is sometimes 8 to 10 years of people never learning to hear the things they don't want to hear. So when they have a bad interaction with their boss, where do they go? They don't get the mirror and say, geez, I need to learn from this. Where they typically go is, I'm going to find another job. My boss doesn't like me. So if you happen to hear a parent, or hopefully you're not one of those parents who, oh, I think the coach doesn't like my kid. I think the teacher has it out for my son. He only got a B-. Maybe your kid wrote a crappy paper. And it's tough, right? So I want to share with you what I consider the secret sauce. Now, this is where I defend leaders. Approachability and coachability. It is the secret sauce. Teaching employees how to seek and accept feedback, how to navigate the understanding of applied coaching and mentoring, peer-to-peer feedback, peer-to-peer insight, self-coaching, really looking in the mirror. Now, I've defined coaching for the last 30 some years as a two-step process. Number one, it's getting someone to look in the mirror. Number two, it's getting them to take action on number one. Very rarely do people do number one arbitrarily on their own. So 85% of people, according to Tasha Eurich, who wrote a great book on the New York Times bestseller list called Insight. And she reports 95% of the people in her survey said, yes, I'm highly self-aware. When she tested them, only 10% were. That means leaders have 8.5 out of every 10 employees significantly lack self-awareness. So they're not going to be as good at teammates as they could. They're not going to be as open to feedback as they could. And that puts a lot on leaders. And we tend to think about this very top-down approach. Well, leaders have to coach. Leaders have to engage. Leaders have to mentor. Leaders have to guide. Leaders have to execute the strategy in alignment with the organizational goals, expectation, mission. So do the employees. So we have to understand one thing as leaders, and this is where you have another opportunity. What is their motivator? Now, we have to motivate people as it relates to their job. There's nothing wrong with that. Yet we have to find out what motivates the person doing the job. Typically, when we start employee engagements, we will have roughly about 65 to 90% of leaders will say, I don't know what motivates my employees. And my question is, do you have a list of your employees and exactly what motivates them and what they see as their next step? Whether it be inside the job, maybe beyond the job, maybe a promotion. It's not always a promotion, by the way. And so when you think about that, and I understand that, let's say I'm coaching someone named Susie, and Susie wants to become a first-time supervisor, yet she doesn't handle conflict with one of her teammates well. I might say, well, Susie, What if you and Tom were to get along and you found a way to navigate some tough conversations with him and you learned how to handle those conversations that make you uncomfortable? How might that help you become a first-time supervisor down the road? So I bring in her motivator into the conversation, which leads to what? Her willingness to something that most people avoid like the plague: personal change. So we have to understand something as leaders. And I think we have to facilitate this so people really do execute, understand their role in being approachable and coachable. Now, when I lead employee sessions, I literally say to employees, and they all laugh, which is hysterical to me. I said, would you want to manage you? And people look at me funny and I go, no, would you want to manage you? People start laughing. I go, you're laughing at yourself. They even start laughing harder. I go, so when you give a response to feedback on something you don't like, honestly, all BS aside, raise your hand if you think you give off an impression of discord or disagreement. Every hand in the room goes up. Now, most people won't offer that of themselves, right? So approachability and coachability is also a mindset. It's a skill set. It takes practice. So we have to remember there's not just a right brain and a left brain. There's a positive brain and a negative brain. Nobody goes home at the end of the day and their spouse says, honey, how was your day? Neutral. I didn't have a feeling at all during the day. It was really amazing. Just kind of glided through. Didn't have any thoughts or feelings the whole day. We usually have good days or bad days because we can be very, very, for lack of a better description, manic. We can go from one end to the other end very quickly. We are emotional creatures. Now, I didn't put this into the captions, and I should have. We teach something called emotional interpretation, and we teach something called RIAR, R-I-A-R. When we hear something, the first R is we react, the I is we interpret, the A is we articulate, meaning we tell other people, and the fourth R is we reflect. Rarely do we get to reflection. So when somebody says, hypothetically, that green shirt looks terrible on you, Tim, my reaction is, I'm ticked off, I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm offended. Now I'm going to interpret, that person's a jerk. They have it out for me. Articulate, I'm going to tell 4 people who are going to tell 4 people. Now there's 16 versions of what I said. And by you get to the 16th, the story becomes, and I guess he threw a brick at Tim's head. It becomes something that is not even close to reality. And I never really get to reflection. So here's the key with RIAR. You reverse the R's. So if somebody says to me, Tim, your shirt looks terrible. You shouldn't do a video with that ugly shirt. My reflection would be, I'm not going to respond now. Let me digest what you said. I'll still feel that emotion. But then the next day I might say, this isn't as professional as a sports shirt. It's a little bit more laid back. It's a little Hawaiian. Does that represent our brand? I need to think that through. So I'm going to interpret that. Is there a different shirt? I'm going to articulate. I might tell somebody else, hey, I got some feedback on my shirt. Would you recommend some things? And then I can react to that person. It takes practice. So why do we do all this? Here's the funny thing. The Gallup organization reports people engage 8 times more when we lead with the good stuff. The progress principle, a great study by a woman by the name of Teresa Amable at Harvard, said that people are at their most motivated. They're at their most motivated state when they're progressing in their job as it relates to their current job. So when we come back to the job versus the person, I always go back to the notion of come into my office. When a boss comes out to an employee and says, Joanne, I need to see you in my office right away. Tom, I need to see you in my office right away. What does the employee do? Do they go, yippee, my promotion's here? No. Every time I've asked that question, I've never had a positive response in 30 years. It's always, uh-oh, what did I do wrong? Because we have cultivated that belief. So we as leaders have a responsibility to reverse that, which ultimately leads to greater approachability and coachability. So when you call people into the office, you call them into the office for the good stuff and say, Joanne, my boss Lisa's here. I wanted her to hear this firsthand. Your last 2 reports have been fantastic. Your work is more detailed. Your teammates are loving you. You become so helpful. Now, maybe she's not where she needs to be ultimately. What you're doing is you're leveraging the principle of progress. Guess what happens? She leaves the office. Now, she freaked out because she saw your boss in there. So there's a little fun with this. She goes out to the cubicles, even virtually, the virtual cubicles. And people will say, so what'd the boss say? Guess what happened? Now the leader's coaching 10 people. Oh, he was just praising me on my job well done, on my reports, my last 3 charts, or whatever it might be. Guess what happens? The mindset starts to reset. Now, here's the funny thing. When you think about these numbers, 8 to 1 more positive, 76% are at their most motivated state. Do you know the Gallup organization also reports that only 29%, less than 3 out of every 10 employees, are positively engaged? They're either neutral or actively disengaged, meaning they're negative. That's a lot to put on leaders. So is it the leader's responsibility, or does the employee have a responsibility of cultivating themselves? And I dare say, yes, they have a responsibility to look in the mirror and say, I'm responsible for me. My boss is not responsible for me. The organization isn't responsible for training and cultivating my career. They can provide me career opportunities, but it's up to me. So how do we do this? I'm going to give you 2 lessons here in a second. We teach something called EAT feedback. It uses a concept that we created called a psychological disrupt. I'm going to give you a little bit of humor, so I hope you don't mind this. You ever get those cold calls and they do the proverbial Tim, and you go, yeah, now you can't screen the call. That's why they do that, by the way. And you say, yeah, oh, hey, this is John over at so-and-so company. And it's really nice to talk to you. And they give you the traditional cold call, right? It's an interruption. It's 6:30 at night. And then they say something like, do you have a few minutes? And I'll say, well, not really. I threw my back out. I've been on the floor for about 18 hours. I just crawled to the phone. I just got to it. So it's funny I was even able to answer. If you hear an ambulance in the background, they're actually coming for me, but what can I do for you? Now, I bet you're laughing right now. What I'm doing is I'm interrupting the normal pattern that they have. I'm interrupting what they're normally get. Well, okay, sure, I got a few minutes. Go ahead. We tend to have very rhetorical conversations. So what EAT feedback does is it teaches employees to go seek and ask for feedback. We have a whole program on it where you go to teammates, peers, subordinates, bosses, people from other departments, friends. And when you ask for feedback, we teach employees, don't wait for feedback. Go get it on your terms. So when you go to a teammate, my volleyball players did this. What are two things I'm doing well? What's that one thing where you feel like I could raise my game? I don't tell people go ask for constructive feedback because the other person will feel uncomfortable. People don't like to deliver bad news. So what we have to do is create that two-way conversation of comfort for both parties. And so when you get the feedback, if I come to you and say, where do you think I could have an opportunity to improve? And you say, that shirt does not look good on you. I just would not wear that shirt. It doesn't come off professional representing the company. EAT stands for embrace, ask, and tell. So when I embrace, I say, well, first of all, thanks for the insight of my shirt. Let me ask you, the A, what color shirt or what kind of shirt would you recommend I use? And you say, a blue polo would look great on you. The T is, well, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go out and buy a shirt and I'm going to try what you said. It interrupts the normal pattern of what? I agree or disagree with the feedback. See, when we disagree with feedback, we dismiss feedback. This shirt looks great on me. My boss is a jerk. And I emotionally start to spin things. So what we do is we teach organizations, and for leaders' benefit, employees learning how to eat feedback. You're eating it. You're chewing on it. You're not spitting it out as graphic as that comes off. You're embracing it. You're then asking for clarification. And the amazing thing when people practice this, I just had one the other day where we have a journal where people have to record the actions they took. And she said, I asked my friend for feedback and I thought this will be easy. And her friend said, do you really want to know where you could improve? And the friend said, yeah, thinking she wasn't going to get anything. She said, when you're done talking, you immediately pick up your phone. And it's like you're not listening to me, or what I have to say is not important. Her friend never knew this, or this woman said, I never knew this. She goes, it's a habit. I said, sure it is. I do the same thing. It's a habit. But you don't know your habit until someone breaks your habit. And I said, so what have you noticed since? She said, I turn my phone over when I talk to my friends. Or I say, I'm waiting for a text from my son. Would you mind if I checked my phone every once in a while? And then everything's much better. We are creatures of habit. So what we do is we teach people When you eat feedback, you're inviting feedback. The minute you hear silence because you push feedback away, I would be very, very worried, because when you hear silence, does your mind go to the positive or the negative? Typically goes to the negative. How come my boss never gives me feedback? He or she never talks to me. Now I got the end of the year review. Oh, by the way, were you taking feedback during the course of the year before the end of the year review? That's your responsibility as much as it is your leaders. The second concept that we teach is something I absolutely love. Now, my daughter hates this, and I share this with her. I said, do you want to really have a great career, a great start to your career? And she said, of course. I said, I want you to think about 3 things, and you're going to laugh at me, and you're going to make fun of me, and you're not going to want to hear it because it's coming from your father. I get that. Number 1, show up early. Number 2, stay late and be really, really helpful during those times beyond your job. You will never have to worry about employment. How can I say that with such confidence? Remember the 29% versus 71%? Remember the 85% versus the 10%? Or the 95% versus the 10% of self-awareness? The funny thing is, she gets this job at an Ivy League school. She works at the university, and her boss gave her that feedback. We hired you because you're always on time. You're the most helpful person. You're willing to stay late. It's almost like we scripted it. So what we teach is, you want to be ahead of the game. If you want to take your career to the next level, if you want to go to that level where people go, wow, you are a personal brand. The way you speak, the way you react, the way you help, the way you don't help, the way you walk, the way you don't walk, the way you talk, the way you don't talk, the way you listen, when you don't listen, you're creating a perception of yourself. That is a reputation. And often it's inaccurate and it's really unfair. So we as individual contributors have to make a deliberate effort. And so when I get to this point and I'm teaching a workshop, someone will say, well, what's the number 1 thing you would recommend us to do? I said, go into your boss's office once every 2 weeks and say, boss, what am I doing well? And what's that one area based on your observation I can raise my game? And say thank you when they're done. Don't worry about agreement or disagreement. Make it easy for people to give you feedback. Make it easy to approach and coach you. And then you're going to cultivate something called approachability and coachability. But the minute you fold your arms, the minute you roll your eyes, and the minute you but, you are pushing people away from you. So if you want to get close to people, I always remind people of this. The way you accept leadership, the way you provide comfort for someone to give you feedback, you've created a sponsor, an advocate, or a foe. Now, you may not want to hear that as an individual contributor. So you as a leader, we have the opportunity to build approachability and coachability. It is the secret sauce. So when you think about the numbers, when we call people into the office for the good stuff, people engage 8 times more when we lead with their strengths. Make a list of all your employees, write down their strengths, put it on the back of your door. Make sure you acknowledge every person once a week, if not once every 2 weeks. Put a note on their desk, send an email, copy your boss. You want trust to go up? So what we have to remember, and we have to go back to the job versus, the person doing the job. Build the person up. Don't just focus your feedback and your insight and your observations on the job that they're doing, because a person will have goals. Now, I hate this statistic. I actually hate citing it, to be honest with you. When the number 1 reason that people leave organizations, the number 1 reason, now it's actually been altered since the pandemic, because one of the top reasons was, providing workplace flexibility at home or in the office, flexible work conditions. But the number 1 statistic really for decades has been they quit on their boss. They don't quit on the organization, they quit on their boss. And I've always hated that stat, and here's why. Was the boss wrong? Is that a bad statistic? Or is that a misguided statistic? Here's why. Because it absolves the person from being honest with themselves. Were they approachable and coachable? Were they easy to lead? So the other day we were teaching a segment called Leadership Latitude. And I actually tell a story. I was at a manufacturing plant, a local company here where I live, and people were complaining about the plant supervisor and the scheduling. So I got their job descriptions. I got HR's permission to do this. I said, highlight the area where it says that you're supposed to critique and review the plant manager. People are looking down, they're got their highlighter, they're looking up at each other like, this is weird. I said, now with the other color highlighter, highlight the area where your opinion really matters about leadership. So there's always one, this lady raises her hand, Tim, this is dumb. It's not in here. I go, then be quiet. He's the plant manager for a reason. He is going to make decisions some people disagree with. But my God, let's all get to the water cooler and gripe. Or you can raise yourself up and get a job like that. Get in his shoes sometime. How would you feel right now if he were in here listening to you? And I go like this to get up and I said, I can go get him. And everyone starts to freak out. And I said, think about it. Has anyone ever sat down and said, this is kind of disruptive to some people. Would you mind if I offered some suggestions? And you said it calmly. How many of you have done that? Not one hand went up. See, we're emotional creatures. Remember Ryer. We react, we interpret, the plant manager's a jerk, we articulate, we all talk at the water cooler, we gripe, we don't even get within 20 miles of reflection. So what we have to do as leaders is facilitate this thing called approachability and coachability. One of the ways you can do that is have them practice eating feedback. Teach them. We actually have books on both Eat Feedback and the Employee Difference. How are you going to differentiate yourself? What are you going to do to differentiate yourself, Lisa? And how do you think that will help you become a first-time supervisor if you bring their motivator into it? So again, the secret sauce is really approachability and coachability. It's teaching people, not just teaching them, but facilitating the craft of practice and application. My volleyball players hated it. Mid-season became a part of their habit. I had one kid said, Coach, I still remember all those lessons. He's in a graduate school for engineering right now. And he said, we get into emotional intelligence and there's some leadership courses we have to take. And he said, it's just, I'm laughing. And people in my study group go, what's so funny? He said, I've already gone through this. My volleyball coach made us go through this. I had to ask for feedback once a week from my teammates. And he was in varsity for 3 years. So for 3 years, he was practicing asking and saying thank you for feedback, whether he agreed or disagreed with it. And I said to him, I said, how many times in the moment did you hear feedback and you said to yourself, oh, this is so inaccurate, and you were emotional. And then later you go, you know what, I can kind of do that. He said, yeah, that happens a lot. And I said, yeah, it's interesting because you were never really someone who rebutted feedback when I gave it to you. And he said, no, but I would stay silent and I would stew on it. I would vent to myself about it. And I said, yeah, what would happen later? You kind of come to the realization, yeah, I do give off that perception. And so when you as a leader, if you are intrigued by this, one of the things, let me just share this with you very quickly. If you're intrigued by this, we have a whole program called approachability and coachability, where we teach your employees organizationally or per team member. And we actually have a program where we assign them a coach and give them feedback, where they have to go practice feedback, practice positive attitude, find their motivation. We have a program called the Employee 52 weeks of just positivity, actions every week they have to do and record. We have something called the Employee Difference, and a little bit of a sales pitch. But if you are looking to cultivate leadership latitude, people that follow, people who are less emotional, not robotic, less emotional when they hear things they don't like to hear, practicing the craft of approachability and coachability, your leadership actually becomes a lot easier. So take a picture of this QR code, fill out the form. We'll get you some information. We'll schedule a call with you. No big sales pitch. The cool thing that we do is we all have implemented this in a platform called Cadence Coaching that we built. So when we send out lessons, they have to answer questions of what they did and what they applied. And then we assign you a coach to actually provide feedback based on their real world experiences. It's very, very cool. So fill out this QR code. We'll get back to you. But again, I go back to approachability and coachability. It is the secret sauce. If your team was seeking feedback from you, from peers, from people from other departments, and saying thank you, ask yourself, would your team strengthen? Would collaboration and communication improve? Of course it would. So do me a favor, fill this out. We'll get back to you. We'll send you some information, schedule a call with you, and have a really subtle chat, but tell you how the program works. And it's also very customizable, so it's very easy for us to deliver. Thanks for your time. Have a great day.